Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by Play Picks and the Lines, coming to you from the West Coast. Josh Lander, joined as always by my guy on the East Coast, Nate Weitzer. Second episode of the new season for us here as we wait for it to kick off. We're still in preseason. Going to go ahead and look at the Eastern Conference this time, specifically the top of the Eastern Conference. Take a look at who we think is really actually has a legitimate shot at the title and at winning the Eastern side of the conference as well. And then, move our way on down to maybe some of the best of the rest as well. As always, if you do still need a FanDuel or DraftKings account, make sure you head to fdpicks.com or dkpicks.com. Find all those local listings in your area. And we will jump into a couple of the odds that we're looking at right now for that Eastern Conference. Nate, let's get into it.
Yeah, of course, it starts with the Nets. They're plus 200. They're the favorite to win out of the entire NBA. And then we have the defending champion Bucks down to plus 900. Surprisingly, that's much higher than they were last season. And then the Sixers are plus 2,000. The Heat plus 2,500. Hawks plus 3,500. Celtics plus 4,000. Let's not leave them out. But yes, this discussion obviously begins with the Nets. And are they going to hold serve this year and win the East? I think we all agree that if they had not lost 1.5 of their big three, they would have last season. But now we are still dealing with a situation where Kyrie Irving might not play at all. He might only play in road games, which would just create a heavy distraction. The latest news about him is that if he were traded, because there's been rumors that maybe a Ben Simmons for Kyrie trade would benefit both teams. If he were traded, he might just retire, which, with Kyrie, that is not a bluff. You can absolutely expect that. So we have to kind of look at the Nets as a unit without Kyrie Irving at this juncture. And I think me and you both agree, Josh, that because of all the shenanigans and the off-court issues and the chemistry issues he can create, because he's not always engaged defensively, we don't necessarily see it as hurting the Nets' chances if he's just not on the team. Obviously, if they were able to trade him, they would get something back. But the Nets really shored up the edges of their roster this offseason, though. And that includes a guy like Patty Mills, who can step in and do some of the things that Kyrie does, can definitely play well off James Harden as an absolute knockdown shooter, a better defender than Kyrie Irving, 100% true. They added veteran bigs. They get LaMarcus Aldridge back. They got Paul Millsap, who's basically a Blake Griffin facsimile at this point in their careers. And
hey, Blake Griffin was dunking. Just let's not forget Blake Griffin was dunking a few times in the end of the regular season. But yeah,
right.
Similar.
What Blake brought he was like a Giannis stopper for a little while there. What he brought was the ability to just use his acumen to play defense, to get key rebounds, to make the right pass. And Millsap's just another guy who could do that in the playoffs. Yeah. And when you talk about winning the East, it is, can you stop Giannis to a degree? And the Nets, I think, are a better defensive team this year. No longer have to deal with DeAndre Jordan. They got Nicholas Claxton at center. They just have better depth. They have James Johnson, another potential guy to throw at Giannis.
Yeah.
And I think that their defensive output is going to be better. And of course, we don't even need to mention it, but we both think that Kevin Durant's the best player in the world. And when you have another top 10 guy easily in Harden, I think they are deserved favorites.
100%. Kevin Durant coming back another year removed, right, from a really nasty injury that kept him out for a really long time. So you got to consider what he's going to be able to do in terms of stamina, not breaking down quite as much as he did at the end of the playoffs last year. Granted, he had no help in the playoffs, so understandably he was playing 40 to 48 minutes every night and really like expending a ton of energy. But either way, his conditioning will be better. He'll be in a ton more games in the regular season as well, hopefully, barring any injuries. Obviously, they didn't get much younger, which was never going to happen when you're that good and you're not going to get a very high pick and you really only have money at this point for the rest of your room to pick up guys in that sort of older guys who want a shot at a chip, right? Guys like Paul Millsap, James Johnson, even LMA coming back, right? Like LaMarcus coming back is all examples of not getting any younger or really even any more athletic in your front court, but at least you now have a few more guys so that Blake Griffin isn't expected to guard Giannis for 38 minutes in a game game or what have you. So, which was never going to be the case. And obviously Nicholas Claxton is someone as well that we should talk about a little bit in terms of having another defensive presence down low, potentially seeing him start, at center or at least playing a ton of minutes at backup center, and in that second lineup. He's still a nice athlete for a small ball five. But I think it's interesting because, to your point, they did what they needed to match up against the Bucks really well. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves talking about the Hawks, but I don't think they match up with a team like the Hawks really well. In terms of the spacing that the Hawks have and the way that they're going to play is going to be a lot different than the Bucks. I mean, there's similarities in spacing, but when you have your point guard leading the charge with a ton of wings and a bunch of sort of betweeners in terms of DeAndre Hunter and guys like that who can definitely guard multiple positions and cause matchup problems on the offensive side of the ball, because it's tough to find a guy to guard DeAndre Hunter if it's not someone around his size of 6'8", 6'9", long guy who can also put it on the floor from the 3-point line. So I think it's interesting to see what's going to happen there. And as we're sort of talking about which teams legitimately have a shot, I do think the Hawks have a shot, and it's interesting because I think one of the things that I know you wanted to talk about specifically was do the Hawks have a shot at winning their division, considering that the Heat are another team I think we're considering. Just to lay it out, I would, and you tell me what you think. I would say the Nets, we start with them because they have the best shot probably at the title, if not at least the Eastern Conference, and then the other teams in serious legitimate contention for the Eastern Conference, you've got to think Bucks, Heat, and then really, Celtics. And then to me, it's like the Hawks are in there, but the Heat and Hawks to me are pretty much even. The Bucks and Nets might have set themselves apart. And then the Philly is such a huge question mark right now with Ben Simmons that it's tough to place them. So it's really like a weird mix of like two teams that we think have the best shot in the Eastern Conference, and then maybe 2 to 3 teams that are that tier 2. Right before you get to the best of the rest. So, what do you think of that list, and which one of those teams are you really, talking about that's intriguing with the odds that they have right now?
Yeah, I mean, with Bucks Nets, you have consensus options. With the Hawks, you kind of have a consensus option, consensus sleeper because of what happened last year with their playoff run. But I think when people zig, I would rather zag and say Miami, like I talked about with the Lakers, they had last year was a wash because of the bubble. And like the Lakers, they might not go hard the entire regular season because they are a veteran-laden team. They're the second oldest team behind the Lakers. Right. They might let the Hawks win that division, and the Hawks are plus money to get that done. But I would take the Heat to win the conference as a long shot more than I would take the Hawks. They are a better playoff team. Just to remind you, the key moves for them: PJ Tucker, who did a decent job on Kevin Durant, at times doing enough to slow him down, and Kyle Lowry, who is, basically was the second best player on a championship team a few years ago. In addition to Jimmy and Bam, I think they're going to be a tougher matchup for anyone, particularly for the Nets. And if I'm thinking about a team that, if I'm the Nets, I would worry about, it's as if you get that Heat team playing with that type of chemistry and fully healthy in the playoffs, I would not necessarily favor the Nets. I mean, I would favor them, but I would have no problem riding with the plus money on the Heat.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying there. And it'll be interesting too, because a lot of this is going to come down to what happens in the regular season and then how teams match up in the playoffs, right? Like we saw last year, the Bucks had to go through the Nets probably earlier than they would have liked, considering how well Philly, got themselves seeded, even though it didn't work out for them. But I think, same thing this year. If those two teams don't meet each other until the Eastern Conference Finals, right, it's a little bit of a different story for a team like the Bucks and the Hawks and how far they're able to make it. I do think it's interesting about the Heat that it feels like we don't really even know anything about them. We know what their ceiling is from going to the championship, but once again, the bubble and the year after, specifically for the Heat, I think they were the most affected by both, and inversely so, right? The first year in the bubble, they were actually given a little bit of an edge when you consider the makeup of their team. The guys like Jimmy Butler, who are like, I don't care about anything but basketball. Put me in a bubble. That's my heaven, honestly, right? And then you got other guys who were not into it. The Heat made their run. A few things happened that broke for them really well, including the Bucks really falling apart in that series with them, which they did not do the next year. But the Heat were tired. Once again, now you come back to the next season, less games, but less time in between, an older roster, less time, and then Victor Oladipo goes down, who was supposed to sort of be that wild card that might be able to kind of come in and boost them. And it didn't really work out that way for them. So it does feel like things could go either way for Miami. You talk about being a better playoff team. I think I would actually say that's a wash as well, in my opinion, when you look at what the Hawks did last year in the playoffs and the way that they were able to really, turn the game into the exact style that they wanted, so that Trae Young had the ball in his hands for roughly 48% of the game and 60% of the team's offense. And that really helps them at that point.
But
so
who did they play? They played the Knicks and the dysfunctional Sixers. It's kind of a similar situation to the Suns, in my opinion, that this was just a really weird post bubble year. The Hawks took advantage. Trae Young is a killer. We know this. I'm not ready to put my money on them running through this Eastern Conference again, which is way better. And I would like to toss back to you on how you feel about the monster that is Giannis. And, we saw him get better and better as those playoffs went along. We call Kevin Durant the best player in the world, but Giannis might be taking that crown. And do you think that the Bucks, can just ride him with basically the same roster back to glory?
Maybe we really look at the last two seasons as not very helpful in telling us anything about this season in general, because I'm seeing a pattern as we talk about every team that maybe we didn't even think of as we were talking a bit about what we were going to talk about in this show ahead of time. It didn't really come up for either of us until now that every team has something that you can look at from last year or the year before and say, caveat, asterisk, in a way, whether it's guys going down because of the compact schedule, or it was just certain teams like the 76ers falling apart to the wrong, and specifically Ben Simmons, obviously, falling apart at the wrong time, allowing the Hawks to get to a conference finals maybe a year earlier or two than we thought. So with that, where I'm at with that, though, is I do believe it's going to come down to what do the Nets do, because they were the first domino to fall last year. And obviously AD going down in the first round on that side of the brackets, right? That meant the Lakers were out at that point, and that let the Suns in. But on the Eastern side, the dominoes started to fall when at the time where Kyrie went down, basically, right? Even though James Harden wasn't even in the game yet, the combination of any two of those three on the court at the same time meant that they were the favorites to not only win the Eastern Conference, but in everyone's opinion to win the entire finals. So if you're going to have, if Kyrie doesn't come back and you do have a healthy James Harden and a healthy Kevin Durant and some combination of 4 of their 8 legitimate backups at different positions, right? And half of them are able to stay healthy for some depth into the playoffs. The Nets are the team that you put your money on right now. And that's why right now, as we're recording this in the beginning to middle of October, to me in the East, you put your money on the Nets, right? If you want to start to look at how things might turn in your favor, or if you want to sort of predict that the Nets won't necessarily really be a team that can pull it all the way through the season, there's going to either be distractions or injuries to one of 2 of their 3 key players, then I think now you're looking at the Bucks once again being able to do what they did. And I do think that the additions of PJ Tucker and a few other guys, there was one other that I really liked as well. I hate to say it, but Grayson Allen's a great pickup. The guy I was thinking of is Rodney Hood. I think you've got a few more floor spacers. You've got a few more guys that can play off ball and score. You don't have PJ Tucker, which you liked for his tenacity, but he wasn't bringing you anything on offense. And now you've got
DiVincenzo back. That's the key to the Bucks.
Precisely. Right? So when you look at DiVincenzo, people don't still talk about that, especially because they won the chip. We didn't really need to talk about DiVincenzo being out as much. But at times that was pretty clear that they needed him, especially as you mentioned on the defensive side of the floor. To me, it's not worth it right now to put anything other than the Bucks or the Nets in this division to win that conference. And I would say, if you do, like I said, if you even think there's an inkling of possibility that the Nets could face some of the similar turmoil as last year, then the Bucks are a little bit better money. Even though, like you said, it's for the first time ever, they actually have worse odds. Their odds went down a bit, despite the fact that they just proved that they could do it. Right.
Right. I mean, because Vegas is reading that people don't necessarily buy into these results when 13 or 15 all-stars get injured at some point during the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, when we're introducing the best of the rest, we do have to talk about the Sixers. And they're kind of a wild card in this situation that I think that they're going to play well with Simmons just on ice. The Sixers front office is not caving. They're not trying to sell him for 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
And the Sixers players who are going to be out there are going to be galvanized by that to a degree. I think they're going to be a really good regular season team. Something to talk about in terms of betting trends. Do I think that they're going to navigate the playoffs? With Simmons returned for player X, who is not named Damian Lillard? No, I don't. So I wouldn't, in this futures episode, I would not consider a team coached by Doc Rivers with Joel Embiid's shaky health and still a below average backcourt when you compare it to the rest of the East, winning that division. But could be a good team to watch during the regular season and obviously see how the Simmons thing plays out.
Yeah. Well, and if the Simmons thing does play out where in some world Kyrie ends up on the 76ers, whether or not he retires, I don't think he's going to be able to pull his shenanigans in Philly the way he has in other places. One, Philadelphia fans are going to turn on him from the jump, right? I mean, for Boston fans, he put on a nice smile and a wave for a few months, maybe a month before he got hurt. And then from there, it was really like, get this guy out of town. We'll all volunteer to drive him to the airport. I think it'll be week one that he starts pulling shenanigans in Philly, that Philly fans are like, get him out of here. I don't even think they're going to want him for Simmons, to be honest with you, because you don't even know if he's going to step on the floor. Not only do the fans not have any patience for that, when you've got the veterans on the 76ers and the veteran coach like you have with Doc Rivers, nobody's going to pander to that nonsense. So it's really about, not Kyrie to me for Philadelphia. It's about what else you can get for Ben Simmons, and Daryl Morey and his ego won't allow him, to trade Simmons for anything probably closer than anything less than like 90 cents on the dollar. But he's not going to get it. Simmons already said he's not playing. He put himself in this position. To be honest, I mean, not that anybody cares, but if I was Daryl Morey, I'd be like, all right, I guess we'll eat the money. We'll just have him sit out. His career is going to be ruined faster than our franchise will. So if he wants to make anything of his career, he has to come back on the floor. And that's really it. If it takes a season or 2 seasons, that's all I would do. So moving forward, as though Ben Simmons isn't on your team, and even if he's not on your team because you've traded him for something back, I don't think anything you get back is going to increase your chances to win a championship this year, even compared to if Ben Simmons was playing full strength on your team. So it's really just going to come down to, for Philly, is Embiid able to stay healthy for the season? Because if Embiid is healthy to stay healthy for the season, for another episode, I would consider him for a dark horse for MVP. But last year was sort of the last time in my life that I will allow Joel Embiid to make me think that he can play anything more than 3/4 of the season. He's not going to be able to. He missed 20 games after being a clear front runner for MVP, however 30-40 games into the season last year. So it's just not something that I'm willing to trust. And you can't say that his injury didn't affect the ability for Philly to win, even though we all watch Ben Simmons sort of pass up dunks and label that the best reason. So to finish off my feelings about the rest of the East. If you're considering the Hawks outside of the top 4 in terms of the favorites to win the conference, that means you're putting the Celtics in the top 4, in my opinion. I actually like the Celtics a little bit more than the Heat. And I don't want to take your thunder because I do want to hear your thoughts on the team that I know you follow the closest. But the only thing I will say is I'm actually feeling pretty good about what they have this year versus last. I love that they've got Cantor and Al Horford on their roster again. Together. And I really like the Dennis Schrader pickup because I think you needed one more guy who can, really take the ball, and hopefully between Tatum, Brown, and Schrader, guys who generally look for their shot first. I'm hoping between the three of them, there can be some facilitating that really makes up for the fact that everything's been a lot of ISO ball for them for the past couple seasons.
Yeah, if you root for chaos, you're going to love the Celtics in this situation because they are a team that could go into the playoffs and knock out the Nets or the Bucks or anyone because their talent is as such. This is really just a situation where you're going to see how chemistry, how locker room chemistry, and how coaching and how just having a different voice in the player's ear is going to change everything for this team. And they are going to suddenly look like a top 4 team. I do believe that. But like the Sixers, I think that's more of a regular season betting trend to watch than it is something to back them to win this conference. Just wrapping up, though, I would look at some of these exact options we have on DraftKings for things that you do think could happen. Mm-hmm. The most likely for the Nets is for the Nets and Bucks to meet in the finals of the East. But sticking with my theory on the Heat being solid, Nets versus Heat plus 850. And you could take a different, going back to our Western Conference episode, take a different look, not Nets Lakers in the finals at plus 500, but maybe Nets Nuggets plus 2,200 or Bucks versus Jazz, something off board plus 5,000. Nets versus Jazz, you'd also get insane money. just to spice it up a little bit and look at a season long bet to watch.
Yeah, to be honest, as you're talking about that, the Nets Heat finals, which it's a nice plus 850. To me, the thing is like if you want, like we were talking about pure chaos, if you think Bucks Heat is possible, because like I said, I think Nets and Bucks are somewhat interchangeable. I think even if you do have two Nets players healthy, let's say you have James Harden and KD on one team healthy going against this Bucks squad, I still think that has the possibility of going 7, meaning that I think either team could win. I would still favor the Nets, but to me, if you think those two teams are somewhat interchangeable, I think that Heat and Bucks plus 1,800 is something that I would look at, like we're saying right now, because of the way that, it's at this point in time, Nate, to me, if you're taking bets this early without even seeing teams step on the floor and how they might play together with new players, it's because you've laid out a scenario that you see as plausible. And then you're just betting that will be one of the plausible scenarios that happens, and hoping for a big payout. And you can do that with a couple of those plausible scenarios. And so I think that's what we're saying for these fun bets here. And I would go ahead and just throw that one out there. Like I said, Bucks Heat plus 1,800. So anything else you like that you wanted to bring up here? Anything else relevant to the top of the East or anything?
No, like you said, I'm looking forward to seeing these teams get on the floor so we can have a better idea. And the thing with these future bets is, unlike win totals, you can bet them all year. So we'll have more information. Yeah. We'll be ready to pounce on odds when we think that they're dipping to the right point.
Absolutely. Can't wait to see, how some of these teams come out. Obviously, there's always some surprises, some rooks that we haven't even seen play yet. So maybe we'll be talking about the Pistons. Who knows? Either way, we will be back with you guys shortly as we move on into a few of the other, spicy odds that you can get here, futures, things such as MVP awards and the like. So stay tuned for another one. And until we see you guys again, happy betting.